call the meeting to order and do roll call.
Christina Walu Reynolds.
Carl Brown.
Margaret Beck.
Jordan Sellergren.
Nicole Villanueva.
Frank Wagner.
Deanna Thoman.
All right. Item C, public discussion of anything not on the agenda. All right. Item D, City Council Strategic Plan Presentation.
Okay, we're ready. We have Councillor John Thomas joining us, and he'll be sitting here up at the seats.
Well, hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. And, basically, in my view, to have a kind of a conversation about the strategic plan and how it relates to the Historic Preservation Commission. I was telling Jessica before the meeting started that I just recently saw that you have already developed a work plan in response to the strategic plan. So I'm really impressed that you've already, evaluated it and then, tried to come up with some strategies, short and long term, as to how the strategic plan fits with your mission. And, so my feeling was we can certainly go through the strategic plan briefly as sort of, the framework of what it is that has been developed. And then perhaps we can, go through your work plan if you'd like, or at least have a conversation about that and, see where that goes. But again, thank you so much for doing that. It really, it's kind of exciting to see how a commission kind of critically takes that strategic plan and makes it, explicit reference to it, but also applies it to the work that you're doing as a commission.
I think Kevin deserves a lot of the credit for that, but
He does.
he's not here to accept it. But
Well, Kevin lives not too far from me, so I will, I'm sure we'll touch base on it, especially insofar as I think we'll see there's some things coming up that I think historic preservation, will have, I'm sure, some interest in the outcomes that will come from some of the activity that the staff will be presenting over the next year. So the strategic plan, which was a very long process, it really took a considerable amount of time. I think we started it last March and didn't finish it until late last year, so it was quite involved. Much different than how we did strategic plans in the past, which were more kind of council initiatives that were being considered. This was trying to incorporate, the work of Think Iowa City and, other entities, and trying to fold that into the strategic plan for the city of Iowa City. So there's quite a bit more coordination and consideration of, in my view, multiple agendas rather than just that of city council. But I think it's certainly a good framework. It's the devil will be in the details, I think, as to how successful it is. But I think it does provide a good framework. The values, so you have kind of the values, and then you have the, as you see here, racial equity, social justice, and human rights, climate action, and partnerships and engagement. Those are certainly important values that really should inform everything we do. And then there are areas of the next slide, the way in which it connects with impact areas. And there are 4 of them. The economy. In there you can kind of see how, I think, to me, some of the influences of that sort of multi-entity approach toward the strategic plan of reinforcing Iowa City as a premier community to locate and grow business. That's, to me, kind of a reflection of the involvement of ICAD and Think Iowa City in terms of our direction, as well as our own city council. Are there any there that you would like to comment on or consider for discussion at this point? One I'll mention, and I was telling Jessica, I'm not running for office again, so this will, at the end of this year, I'll be leaving city council after 8 years, 2 terms. And, I had an interview with George Shilcock with the Press Citizen, and I think it was his last article before he left. He's in Columbus now, Columbus, Ohio. And I mentioned to him that this notion of Iowa City is the greatest small city for the arts. And I suggested, why don't we just consider ourselves the greatest small city, in all things. Let's not limit ourselves. Let's see what we can do in other aspects of our city's, strengths and see just how great we can be, whatever the issue may be. We certainly have made great advances in the arts, and I'd like to see that in some of the other areas as well. The next slide. This is a big one for historic preservation, in my view, and we can talk about your work plan. We will be updating the comprehensive plan and zoning code to encourage compact neighborhoods with diverse housing types and land uses. That is one that I think we need to be very careful with that. I don't know if any of you have read how other cities have, who have gone down this road of doing form-based coding, at a citywide scale. It's a very challenging process. And so I think, among other things, historic preservation, insofar as you do have certainly an interest in historic preservation, I often think of it as much neighborhood preservation as it is historic preservation. And, that's going to be a critical issue, in my view, with how we apply that form-based code. Part of the emphasis with it is that it will create more affordable housing. And I think that's going to be critical in terms of trying to direct that effort of form-based coding so that it captures and creates affordable housing.
A question on that.
Yeah.
Can you give just a layperson's understanding of what form-based coding is?
Sorry. Form-based coding is there are some areas of Iowa City that have developed form-based coding. The first was actually the Peninsula neighborhood is in effect a form-based code. That was done some while ago. But more recently, we've developed a form-based code for riverfront crossings, the South District, and then most recently, the so-called Rorit sub-area within the Southwest District. And the emphasis with form-based code is more on form than use. Our conventional codes, the land use designations are based on use. You have residential zones, single family, multifamily, and so forth. Commercial zones, same thing. With a form-based code, there isn't as much emphasis on the use. It's more on the form of the building, how it relates to the street. Historic preservation, the beauty of historic preservation, and one of the beauties of it for me is so many of the historic houses really present them well to the street. Some of our infill development has blank walls facing the street. It's compliant with our code, or it was when it was built, but it's a blank wall facing the street. So the form-based code is much more sensitive to, building size, building footprint, its relationship to the street. What does the frontage look like? It's more of an emphasis on, again, form as opposed to use. Use can change over time.
So if you want, I can speak to a little bit about what the commission's plan talked about
sure,
for
that's
this area. First, I do want to read the little paragraph that Kevin wrote to kind of begin this for the impact area of housing and neighborhoods. Many older neighborhoods that are now historic districts were designed with mobility, neighborhood commercial nodes, and a variety of housing types for all income levels in one neighborhood. One of the key pieces of our work is protecting healthy neighborhoods. Many of the districts were developed out of a response to unhealthy developments in these areas that motivated the neighborhoods to take action. We help provide stability and provide a platform for reinvestment. Some of our ongoing work is the fact that we do have our Historic Preservation Fund that we can use to help people maintain their houses, especially if they are income qualified. We also have been considering the whole interest in doing survey work south of the railroad tracks in the Kirkwood, Lucas Farms neighborhood. We are ready to partner with them if they ever want to do that. And then we have our long-term goal is to help the formation of a form-based code, especially for areas that are adjacent to historic districts.
Yeah, one of my personal anecdotes, coming into Iowa City in late 2009, we live up on Brown Street, and I was very impressed with all the historic districts and conservation districts. And then I began to realize, the longer I was here, why there were so many of them. It was a preservation effort in part because so much, as Kevin noted, we were seeing demolitions, whole neighborhoods disappear south of Burlington Street. And so the preservation, historic preservation played a significant role in trying to stabilize the neighborhoods when they were under threat. And, as I mentioned to Jessica before the meeting, we're still under threat in my view. And so how do we respond to that? It's, just sort of ongoing issues that have a potentially destabilizing effect. One being most recently the state deciding that we were no longer going to have occupancy caps. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. But there used to be no more than 3 unrelateds allowed in a dwelling unit. Now there are no caps. And so, for example, one example of what that translated to was a house on Jefferson Street that was a single-bedroom, single-bath house, having an addition added to it on the back side, adding 6 bedrooms and 6 baths. So it became a 7-bedroom, 7-bath house. And that's something, given the lot sizes in the core neighborhoods and the alleyway access, you can solve the parking problem for that building by planning parking on the alleyway. I just drove a bike down there the other day, and the lot was wide enough where there was room for, I think, 8 cars along the back side of the property. So they don't have to rely on street parking. They can park on the alleyway. That's a great opportunity, in my view, with the core neighborhoods. It really depends, how it's utilized. But it's what I've come to understand is the core neighborhoods were built for change. And so we just have to do everything we can to try to direct it in the way that Kevin was talking about.
Any other comments on this?
I will say that I did try to get the form-based code work into the strategic plan, and it didn't make the cut. The idea was, at least, to do it more as a priority straight away rather than later, and that didn't get included. I also suggested that when you make improvements on housing, and I think this again is sort of a challenge with the legacy neighborhoods. Sometimes when you purchase the property, it may be in need of repair. You may have to invest $100,000 into just kind of bringing it up to a more normal condition. What can happen with that is you then get a reassessment because of the improvement. I was suggesting we could at least consider kind of a rebate program where for a period of time, if you make those kinds of improvements, you do not get a reassessment. It's kept at its current rate so that we incentivize through that people making improvements and not thinking about, well, if I make the improvements, I'm going to be hit with a reassessment and my property taxes will go up. That too didn't make the cut, but it is something I've seen other cities, especially legacy cities, do. So I like to think that, it wasn't approved for this strategic plan, but it's an idea that's out there. And it could help scale, what you're doing in terms of the grant proposals and so forth, and allow for more of that to happen. So, yeah.
I'll move on.
Know that you had anything on mobility.
I don't think so.
Do you have any thoughts on mobility as it relates to historic preservation?
I mean, I kind of do. I don't know if this is how, I'm sure it could be manipulated to be related, but I've been thinking about bike lane access and stuff like that, and just the way that newer buildings relate to the street. One example would be the buildings between Bowery and Burlington on Gilbert. And, just the general access to those buildings, there's no parking. There's really not a safe, the bike lane's okay, it's fine, but it's not great. So they're empty, so many of those spaces are empty. So I guess, I don't know if it's related, but I do wonder if there could be a street diet, reducing to 3 lanes or even 2 lanes in that stretch. So there could be diagonal parking and bike lane
What street is this again?
on Gilbert between Bowery and Burlington.
Oh, just that little,
Just that
Little piece.
2-block area
uh-huh.
near Mosley's and Sanctuary and stuff.
I think there, and I don't know the current status, but the plan has always been that Gilbert would go from 4 lanes to 3.
Okay.
I think that's the case south, South Gilbert, the South District.
Okay.
And it's supposed to carry through all the way into the downtown.
That would be, I think that
Yeah.
would basically broaden our downtown pedestrian area.
Right. Yeah, it would move that, and with the savings of going from 4 to 3, at least the plan, as I understand it, would be putting in bike lanes on both sides. So, yeah, that would, in addition to calming traffic, because you no longer have jockeying between lanes, that curb lane, the lane that's currently a curb lane would be offset 5 feet. So it's no longer, if you're walking on a sidewalk and there are these cars flying by
Okay.
you, the first 3 or 4 feet of that sidewalk are really unsafe, in my view. You kind of shy away from.
Which, might be a deterrent for people who would want to lease those spaces. It would provide maybe a more comfortable patio setting or whatever.
Right.
Speak into that.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's too conversational.
The mobility, and there, some of my initiatives did make it into the strategic plan, and they do tend to focus in the center of town. So they have, again, many of the things the commission is involved in are in the center of town, with the downtown itself and then the historic neighborhoods. Some of those projects would be reverting Market and Jefferson Street to 2-way traffic instead of 1-way. Reducing the lanes on Burlington from 5 to 3, and converting the curb lanes to parking. So it'd have a similar effect that it's like a road diet, but for a 5-lane street rather than a 4-lane street. My belief is most of our parking volumes do not require more than 1 lane in each direction, pretty much everywhere except coming in on Dubuque, Riverside Drive. There are a few exceptions, but most traffic volumes in Iowa City are such that you don't need 2 lanes in any one direction. We've been sort of trimming off the certain pieces of it. Washington downtown used to be 1-way. Dodge well, Dodge and Governor south of Burlington used to be one way. So we're kind of moving in that direction. And if you're familiar with the work of Jeff Speck, who wrote Walkable City, there's a lot of effort in that book talking on mobility issues like this. And Cedar Rapids has actually done quite a bit of work in this area. So it's, cities that are promoting walkability have often done these things. And one of the great advantages of living in the core in these historic districts is the walkability. So if we improve the walkability in terms of neighborhood stabilization and the desirability of living in the center of town in one of these beautiful historic homes, we do have traffic issues in the core. And that's something that, these initiatives could help over time if we were to implement them. As well as the biking, the bike lanes. I wish the bike lanes were a little bit safer. I'm kind of concerned that.
Every day's you're just taking a chance.
Yeah, I personally, I'm not a, sort of diehard bike rider. I do it mainly recreationally. I do some chores on the bike, but usually I walk. But I don't know that I would feel safe, say, riding on Dodge Street or Governor Street as a part of my bicycle network. That's maybe just my own point of view, but I'm not observing a lot of people using these lanes that we're creating, so.
I use it every day. I use Dodge Street every day.
Okay.
Is there any talk of Dodge or Governor going back to not one way but two way
Yeah, I didn't
again?
mention that one, but that one as well. That is a state highway, so it would require coordination with Iowa DOT. But most everyone that I've talked to who live anywhere near either of those two streets feel that it would be beneficial to go to two-way traffic there.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And that would be, that is I would say, a historic preservation issue, just because the appeal of the homes on those
Right.
roads would increase so much.
And Dubuque has Central Avenue, and that's a two-way street, and that's considered the highway for Dubuque, Iowa.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think I would certainly like to approach Iowa DOT and say, look, your state designated streets, when they come into a city, need to acknowledge that they're no longer a highway, running through a rural countryside. They're going into an urban area, and they need to be respectful of the fact that they may be passing through a neighborhood. They may be passing through the center of town. And if they feel like a highway, a traffic sewer running through those places, it diminishes the quality of life of the context. So some state DOTs understand that. They develop, context-sensitive approaches when their state highways run through towns. I think it would benefit pretty much every city in Iowa, Iowa City and the small towns. Any state highway running through any town of any size, at least the ones I've seen, they tend to they're not people-friendly. Mm-hmm. And that's not good for cities. So you're right, you didn't talk about it in your work plan, but that's something we are working on, and I'm hoping it will, bear fruit in the next year. And again, in talking about partnerships and engagement, these are the sorts of things, if you look at that strategic plan and you see things that may not be under your sort of focus, but will advance your cause, I'm like on these mobility issues, I'm looking for allies. On the form-based code, I'm looking for allies who will help ensure that when we consider these things, that there are people who show up. And you guys are already activists. You're doing the good work of serving on the commission, and you have weight as a commission. And I know Kevin has been pretty active with the things I'm aware of, but now we have a strategic plan that can kind of be a focal document to center your activity on.
And before we move away from this discussion about streets, one thing that's happening that I'm so pleased about, just the restoration work done to the brick streets in the North Side neighborhood. I know when they started tearing up that little stretch of Davenport Street, I think it's the 200 block, I was so fearful that they were going to just pave over that and
Oh,
do
wow.
away with the brick. But no, it's beautifully done. They took up all the brick, placed it back down, everything's very smooth. And now they're going to start Fairchild Street.
Cool.
Yeah, the 200 block, which I'm on that, and I'm
Oh, okay.
getting prepared for, the dust and the noise and all of that, but so happy that they're doing it too. And I think part of that project too is expanding the sidewalks. So they're again looking at the walkability.
Okay.
They're pretty wide right now, but I'm happy that, they're thinking about pedestrians and just the safety of those streets.
We had heard word about this, that the sidewalks may be widened. I know it took me a little while to get used to, they're 4 feet wide typically, and when I came here, I thought, this is a little odd. I'm accustomed to wider sidewalks. On the other hand, there are a lot of existing conditions that could be impacted, depending on how they widen it. Are we taking a foot off on the house side or a foot off the parkway strip?
I think it's the street side, they'll be expanding that way, which, yeah, at first for me, I thought, it's going to it'll change the look of the neighborhood. I feel like the narrower sidewalks kind of fit the old neighborhood. But at the same time, I guess I do want it to be pedestrian friendly. And within that neighborhood, sometimes bikers are on the sidewalk and you've got people walking. It's very close to the university, of course, and students. And so there is a lot of traffic on those sidewalks. So I guess I'm happy that it'll be more accessible in that way.
Right. A little more snow to remove.
Yeah, that's true.
The other, yeah, I agree. A 4-foot sidewalk is hard to walk, 2 people, side by side. You usually kind of have to stagger it because there's just not enough space there for 2 people to walk together. So, yeah, it's one of those things where let's hope the circumstances, the specifics of the implementation, there's some flexibility in how the approach is done, so we don't end up creating, impacts, unintended consequences, things of that sort. Okay.
Move on.
Safety and well-being. That third bullet, that's, again, something that I've been personally interested in, is the idea that we do our best to create community gathering places, that are easy to get to, no more than a 15-minute walk or bike ride. Some of our neighborhoods are really well designed for, connectivity, and I think it became very evident which neighborhoods during COVID provided that connectivity and which ones didn't. And, just speaking again, my own personal experience, the North Side has deep connectivity. We have 2 parks, a school, cemetery, lots of public open space. The sidewalks themselves are used for, conversation. Yet we have the front porches. That's a very important piece of the social life of our streets. Other neighborhoods were not so fortunate, and there was just no place to, sort of get out of your sheltering in place isolation. And so that, for me, my interest in this really accelerated with COVID. I realized there are neighborhoods in Iowa City that do not have any open spaces. And the situation we're in my view, with all the, what some people call the polycrisis of climate change and social isolation, the economy, it's a very long list. We need those places, in my mind, desperately, to break out of our isolation. Loneliness is not a thing to feel when you're faced with the poly crisis. In fact, we need one another to sort of sort through how to respond to the poly crisis at a local level. And so, again, and I think that would certainly, it's an indirect benefit, but that would serve the historic communities as well, which, as I said, are already kind of built. There's a lot of sociability built into the most historic homes. It's one of the charms of the older neighborhoods is, the porch parties, the neighborhoods come to life. We're going through right now this sort of, feels like we're in August already, but, people coming out of their houses. And they need places to go, and I know in our neighborhood it just comes to life. It's almost as if we've been in hibernation and then we just emerge and become reacquainted with one another. And fortunately, we have places and to do that, and I've been trying to push on that initiative citywide. We need to identify where we don't have those things and address them as best we can.
Don't you think that's another way that the form-based code can help too? With the historic neighborhoods, and they used to sometimes have like local stores, corner shops, that kind of thing. With the development of a form-based code, you're looking more at the form instead of the use, and so suddenly those types of places where people also might gather could start developing in some of the
Right.
neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, it's the form-based code does emphasize mixed use as well. So, we would all love to have deluxe in our neighborhood, but it's nice to go over to Longfellow. I mean, there's that too. So, yeah, creating what often are referred to as third places. You have your home, your workplace. We need third places where we can congregate. One that was created by COVID that it's been a blessing, to the north side again, is the closing of Lynn Street.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good.
And we were desperate, we had been talking among ourselves about how can we create a usable open space within the north side marketplace commercial district, and it was right there, in front of us. We just didn't see it. We'll just close the street.
That
And-
plus the George's Beer Garden. It's so good.
Yeah, so it's become a real destination now as an outdoor place. It's sort of a classic Main Street Midwest character, and it didn't take much to do it. We just closed the street. I kind of love how there's really, and there is going to be a fundraising to make some improvements, but it's a pretty bare bones space. It's just the space. I think there could be more shade for sure, but it's a people place without, spending a lot of capital making it a people place. It's just everything's right. The buildings framing the space, put a little paint on the ground, and put some seating out there, and it takes off.
I'm trying to remember, that was a response to COVID, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To close that little section. And I have to say, it is kind of nice they open it back up in the wintertime when, I'm able to walk to many places, but of course in the winter it's nice to get in the car. And for me, that's a direct route home and I cut across there. So I like that flexibility too,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, it's there when you need it, and then in winter. And it was a need based on the loss of occupancy in the restaurants. And so opening up the street brought back occupancy to some of those places. Without COVID, I can almost guarantee that the business owners would never have allowed that because they would have said, we're losing parking. We can't afford to lose parking. Well, fortunately with COVID, they acknowledged that it was important to do it, and the parking problem never really materialized.
And who had that plan? Was it business owners or was it the city decided to close that
You
section.
know, it was one of those things that was just in the air. Cities were
Okay.
doing it all over the place, and that seemed like a really logical place. Plus, we had the Ped Mall, which already was sort of a larger scale example of that. Some cities closed neighborhood streets. That was some of, again, this what I just mentioned. Some of our neighborhoods, we did not do that. We did not consider how we could do some street closures in the neighborhood or in any neighborhood. But many cities did evaluate where do we need places, giving people places to safely congregate where they don't have any, and they came in and did what we did on Lynn Street in a residential neighborhood.
And you see some of these bigger cities, I think San Francisco is one where they have streets where they have bikers, joggers, and cars, and kids playing, and it's just agreed that you are going to be very slow and cautious through that space. That amazes me, too.
Right.
Talk about being scared to be on a bike.
I think my observation is the general downtown area is sort of has a sort of what I would call self-regulating aspect to it, where, you know, people, bikes, cars, I don't see too many cars flying through the downtown, except on Burlington and Gilbert. You know, those are kind of the two auto-oriented streets in the downtown. But otherwise, they self-regulate pretty good. That's my goal with these street, you know, going road diets and so forth is, let's see if we can't get them to self-regulate, which also would mean less traffic enforcement. So people would just be less likely to speed because the road is telling them, slow down. So there's that benefit as well. Is that it for the?
Probably, you know, most of the bulk of our work plan actually focused on also the values in the beginning section. We have, of course, a value with climate action. Historic preservation started because of basically sustainability and stopping demolitions historically. But so we do, our first section of our work plan was climate action, and our ongoing work is, you know, adaptive reuse and, you know, reducing landfill waste and demolitions. One of the things that we struggle with in historic preservation circles, embodied energy is something that's been commonly discussed, even from, you know, the 60s and 70s when preservation originated. But a lot of time we're just talking about emissions and yeah, insulation quality and stuff like that when we're talking about climate action. And you know, the energy that was used to grow and truck and create all of those historic elements and all of those historic houses, you know, demolishing that, getting all of that material in the landfill, and then trucking in all of the materials that it takes to make a new house. You know, that's where we see a lot of value in the buildings that currently exist, all of our masonry buildings downtown, and just preventing all of that energy waste from creating new buildings when we can use the existing buildings. So we do have a line in our work plan to continue to advocate for the fact that embodied energy is something that we can calculate. You know, it doesn't have to be an ephemeral thing that everybody's just scared of talking about, but
Yeah.
we can actually talk about it and value that embodied energy that already exists in the historic buildings.
I completely agree, and it's again why, you know, there have been a fair number of demolitions in the core neighborhoods recently, and I would prefer trying to come up with a strategy where we can preserve them if they're on large lots, which is often where I think we're seeing at least some of them, not all of them, but you know, Mary Beth Sloniger recently, you know, had a house over I want to say east of Governor Street, was landmarked, and when she presented to council, she said, the reason I'm doing this is there are a number of houses in our neighborhood that are scheduled for demolition. And I thought, wow, that's what you have to do, sort of, as I was saying, the preservation aspect of historic preservation. You're literally trying to save buildings from being torn down. And, the strategy I would prefer is, no, let's preserve, especially if it's a large lot and you have a small home, which is sort of a formula for demolition. We preserve that house, and we can increase the density there. We could put an ADU on it. We could perhaps have a second unit on it if our code allowed for it. And, you preserve what's there and add to it, rather than tear down, perfectly fine building that, perhaps has greater yield on the lot, but we can save the building in the process of moving forward. I think maybe it's just my personal fondness for, the sort of these pocket neighborhoods, as they're called, where you have smaller homes. If the lot's large enough, you can kind of create, a composition of cottages arranged around a common space. Parking would be on the alley. We're set up for it, but we have yet to really see, well, I guess Prairie Hill co-housing is as close as we come to a pocket neighborhood.
Well, not only that, but mixing the styles of the eras of architecture, a historic home that's directly adjacent to a contemporary space can look really great. And a lot of cities, have that just because they'll preserve, a smaller building and just kind of build up next to it.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been really fond of that, like the juxtaposition of the modern and historic. Like the cottages being like one example. I know there were a lot of reasons behind that demolition, but that would have been it would have been cool to find a way to incorporate the new structure with the old.
Yeah.
But the church on Iowa and Gilbert, and the Unitarian
Oh, right.
Universalist Church, and then there's also that house that's on Prentice across from Trumpet Blossom, between South Dubuque and Gilbert Street, that was kept in place, and then they kind of just did an L shape with the building to surround it, and I love that. Well, I don't know who argued to keep that house there, but I'm glad it's still there.
I think that was a case of that they didn't give the
They just
person who
wouldn't
owns
give
it
it up.
enough money.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it looks cool.
Well, some of my, in terms of locally, in the core neighborhoods again, the preservation and addition to Longfellow and Horace Mann are two of my favorite projects. It speaks to the idea of continuity, I think, in a really wonderful way, in that it's, there's actually, if you're familiar with Dan Solomon's work, he's an architect. He works mainly on the West Coast, so that's how I got to know him. But this book, it's Housing in the City, Love versus Hope. And he's really does fabulous infill work, sort of honoring the character of historic places. A lot of work in San Francisco, which is where I saw many of his things. And he talks about the continuous city in the book, which I think really speaks to the mission of historic preservation. And by continuity, I made some notes to myself here. And he's talking about, temporal continuity. And this sort of speaks to, if we can preserve buildings, we're preserving history. We're preserving all that memory. And if we can add to it and give it, a second life, so to speak, or sort of an injection of new life like we did with the schools, what a brilliant expression of continuity. We preserved the past while at the same time incorporated the educational needs of the present time for the next 100 years. Those were both, Longfellow and Mann both turned 100 pretty much right around the time of the renovation. So the idea of continuity in time, he's also very keen on the idea of spatial continuity. You know, that the buildings, the historic buildings in this conversation, along with other buildings, they don't all have to be historic, but creating a spatial continuity to the public realm, to the public right-of-way, rather than, in contrast, the disrupted or ruptured city, where you end up with, which is more the city of the post-World War II era, where you have, say again, thinking of Iowa City, you have parking lots, or you have, you know, the auto-centric land use patterns where you might have a kind of a discrete building surrounded by just vacant parking or parking lots or what have you. You've lost that spatial continuity, helping to define the public realm and, you know, giving that constant framing to the public spaces. And then finally, the idea that it's continuous in terms of the social life of the city, that we create a city that we're no longer siloed. It's sort of what we were talking about before. We create places in the continuous city to become acquainted with people of all walks of life. It's an inclusionary approach to living rather than an exclusionary approach. And so you have you know, he was posing the continuous city versus the ruptured city. And I think the historic preservation has a long history of preserving the continuous city in various ways. And I think it's a really lovely way of thinking about, you know, what it is you do. There was Italian architect Aldo Rossi once said that the continuous city is a great encampment of the living and the dead, which I find a very powerful way of putting it as well. And that's the great city. It is a place that has history to it, that's, you know, a grounding for all of us. And so, yeah, I mean, you guys are involved in such important work in all those areas.
So just one other note on climate action related to demolitions. Another thing that we had been looking into, we hadn't really discussed yet outside of, you know, staff and chair conversations, but there are a large number of communities across the U.S. who have been slowly limiting demolitions. Some make certain areas where the buildings would have to be actually deconstructed instead. Portland, I believe it is, requires deconstruction of anything built before 1920, period. What this does is not only save the better quality materials for use in new construction or repair, whatever, to be used, but it creates a deconstruction economy as well, because you need the professionals who can do that work, you need the places where the materials can be stored, you need a way to disseminate the materials to the public or whoever uses them, whether they're, you know, somehow donated or sold or whatever. So that's another thing that is at least happening in preservation communities across the U.S. to try to limit demolition based on capturing those extremely valuable materials instead of putting them in landfill.
It would slow down the rate of demolition, I imagine, just due to inconvenience.
Yeah, yeah. They suddenly will have to consider, you know, is the value of tearing that down really there? We have a good calculator that we can put real-time information about a new development that would demolish a commercial building, and come out with actual numbers that say what that value is, based on what the architect's current drawings are and what we know about the existing building, and calculators have been developed. Donovan Ripkema is a nationally known person who does a lot of studies for communities. His company is called Place Economics, and they have a lot of information online and books and stuff about that. The other value is social justice, racial equality, and equity, and human rights. And I think that the commission values this in the fact that we're trying to tell the whole story of our community, all of the different groups of people who have been there, and the impact on the community. Currently, the only real thing that we have in our work plan revolves around the Montgomery Butler House. And Kevin has been doing research on other things and has found documentation about the history of the family, and how they would bond or sign for new black residents to come to town. And he talked about that when we were talking about the work plan. And so, for I guess Kevin and the commission, coming up with a way to make use of the Montgomery Butler House is still an important goal that's in the work plan. It's tied to basically a lot of these issues, our heritage, the social and racial equity, as well as preventing demolition and making use of buildings that the city owns. And so that's also an important part of the work plan here.
Building community, fostering social connections, developing safe, accessible public spaces as well,
Yeah, it could be. Mhm.
off the trail.
Yeah. The one thing that was kept in about that was that our chair had attended the Parks and Rec Commission meeting, and it was discussed there, the Montgomery Butler House. And so both of the commissions wrote a letter to council and asked for the council for feedback, and then none was provided. And that was something that was kept in there. I think that it was included in I can't remember now, the front part of your agendas, where it's the consent agenda portion of your.
Oh, okay.
I think that's why, so.
I do remember it, and there's so many issues.
Yeah, I know.
It's, that one seems to me to need someone to lead it, someone with a vision for what, how to move that forward. I think you also mentioned, the Emma Goldman Clinic was that the section where that was mentioned?
Yeah, I think so, because he was talking about different buildings and that are already saved in our historic districts, and how, they would only still exist because of the fact that they're in our districts.
Because I did not know about that it was there, and the North Side Neighborhood Association is kind of going through a revival, and we've been talking about activities such as walking tours, which I immediately thought of this as something that would be of interest to the neighborhood. That, guess what?
Yeah.
This is what was here, and we'd been focusing, I think. We understand that the walking tours could be many things. It could be heritage trees, it could be historic buildings, but certainly the Emma Goldman Clinic, I thought, wow, this would be an interesting thing to include in, and I'm sure there are others that, again, it sort of just brings to life. You lose the building, you lose that connection to history. But I thought that was a really interesting note as well.
And if you guys don't remember, I can't remember the actual address right now off the top of my head, but it was the Emma Goldman Clinic was started in a house on purpose because it would be recognized as a house and, keep things safe for people. And
Was it not the Brown Street Inn? Am I remembering?
no,
wrong?
it's not the Brown Street
It was
Inn.
on
It's
Dodge Street?
I think it's on Dodge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's around the corner from
Oh.
us.
It's just
That one
it's
house.
a little
Yeah.
bungalow type
Oh, wow.
house.
Okay.
Yeah. So. I don't know that we have much
Okay.
else to talk about with this.
Well, I would just like to say in closing that, again, thank you for developing the work plan. I don't know that other commissions have gone through that exercise, but it's really,
Kevin is an overachiever.
Yes.
well, sometimes overachieving, people pay attention to that. But, I thought it was a really thoughtful document, and so thank you for putting it together. Okay. Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sean,
thanks for your
Thank you.
time.
All right. Are we ready to move on to item E, report on certificates issued by chair and staff?
Yeah, and I'll just go through these quickly. Certificate of No Material Effect, the Emma Harvett House is having some brickwork done, and we are actually assisting with our Historic Preservation Fund as well. This house on Brown Street, it originally had a full-width porch. I think in the 70s it was reduced to this entrance, but it has some damage. Foundation at this roof connection, the main roof, several things that'll be worked on. Minor review, which is staff review. This window is on the very, very back, and so this window is about 4 stories above ground, is only accessible using a very tall cherry picker. It is interesting because it has this operable section. We did approve it as an alternative material. It will be it's kind of like a fiberglass material, partly because of the fact that nobody's going to get up there to keep it painted really regularly, and it's on the back of the house. And it's unusual. They were able, the way these windows are manufactured, they can almost make any shape. And so they're able to make the triangular shapes, and then they have the operable rectangular section, and they'll put it all together in one frame.
Strange.
And that's original?
Maybe, or it's let's say it would be a historic alteration
Okay.
if it is an alteration, because it's clearly historic, really. And in the space it is. We have just a door replacement here. This house is, it's non-contributing to its district because of the age of the rest of the houses, but it's colonial revival, 1930s, and this little probably open porch was enclosed at one point in time, and they're replacing it with this door, which is actually perfect for a colonial revival house. And it's salvaged. This is a rental house. Just the front stoop, this was before, this is what they did without a permit. And so then the railing should change to one with actual posts. Right now, as you can see, there's a rail, and it's just suspended on the posts, which are nailed to the side of the stringer. And that's not an approvable condition in any way, so it should be fixed. This is also kind of interesting, and actually when I was putting this slide together, I don't know if we needed to review this. This is the Phillips house. It's really a colonial revival house. It is a key property in the Brown Street district. If you can see here, this is the aerial. So here's the house, and there's an alley. And then there's a house on the south side of the alley, and behind that house is this garage. It's owned by the people in this house, and they use it for parking. Well, interestingly enough, across the alley, this is the North Side District, and the North Side District only includes this house. And the district line continues right here. So I think that actually that garage is outside of the district, but we reviewed it anyway. because I only just noticed that right now. And it was the owner of the Phillips house who submitted the application because it's her garage. And we work with her a lot. Okay.
Okay, item F, consideration of minutes for March 22, 2023.
Any changes? Nope. Then we need a motion.
Wagner moves to approve the minutes from March 22nd, 2023.
Reynolds seconds the motion.
Great. G, commission information.
You need to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Item G, commission information.
And I don't really have anything. I was going to give you guys a presentation on the synthetic slide removal, but then it just came up about whether or not you've actually asked for that presentation. So FYI, if you'd like me to present on synthetic siding removal, I need you to ask.
Would that take place today or at
No, it would
another
not
meeting?
take place
You'd have to add
today.
it to the
It
agenda.
would be added to a future agenda at a meeting where we
Have time.
presumably have time. I would have thought that today, but
Mm-hmm.
our earlier discussion went a little longer than I thought it would, so.
Well, I'm interested in knowing.
I wouldn't have thought to ask, but now.
What do you mean by synthetic siding? Like
So-
vinyl siding?
Right, and basically the reason this has come up at all is because, we do have regulations about removing anything from a historic property, basically, on the exterior. And so we easily approve the removal of synthetic siding, but it comes tied to the repair of the historic siding and trim underneath. This is a scary project. I'm personally not scared of it because I've helped others through it, but I haven't done it either. I will be doing it, by the way, so I'll know then. But we, through our work with the commission, but also the university partnership program, we've learned a whole lot about what to expect. And so our presentation is about what you can expect to some degree. I mean, there's always going to be some unknown. You don't know. But what to expect, but also how to work with your contractor about that. How can you talk about the possibility of bidding a project or getting an estimate for a project that you don't know what you're going to come across? And so the presentation would show examples of properties, both what everybody does or what everybody's probably going to have to deal with, but also some of the bad things that we found, which are more limited than you'd think, with a little bit of a bit about how you can talk to your contractor to some degree about that. So we were creating this, I was creating this to provide to homeowners who've thought about it at all. If it's crossed their mind, just so that they'd have something to look at about it. And so when we started having other projects coming up that were suggesting similar things, but maybe not following our guidelines entirely, it was kind of like, well, maybe we should just present this so that everybody has that information as well.
So we can talk about it at parties.
Yeah, you can. You can be like, hey, no, I know.
Oh, I will.
Ambassadors.
Yeah. Anyway, there are things throughout time, if things come up during a project that you guys are like, wow, we need more information about this generally, you can always ask staff to provide more information about that. That kind of thing we can do to some degree, depending on the time we have. So.
I think that would be, I agree, it'd be very interesting to know
Yes,
more about
please.
that. So.
Does all of this constitute a formal request?
Yeah,
to
this
present to
does.
us? Okay.
Do we need to vote on it?
No, you don't need to. I mean, it's the kind of thing where if somebody approached you in the beginning part, off the books thing, then you might be like, okay, do we all want someone to, deal with that issue in a future meeting? Then you might vote because you have a member of the public that's requesting it. And so then you might be more formal. But if it's just kind of for, your information and stuff, you don't need to vote. Unless somebody is really opposed and is like, no, please don't waste my time. Then you should discuss.
Good?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what I do every day, so I
Fine.
mean, it's
All right.
fix
Anyway.
old houses that get.
So yeah, then unless anybody else has anything they want to say to the commission, then you just need to have a motion to adjourn and do that.
All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Bowman motions to adjourn.
Back seconds, yeah.
All right.
And are you going to just vote
Aye.
on that too?
Oh, and let's,
Aye.
yes, all in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.